12/20, 1:41 p.m. Health Department. The day the plantation owner made the decision, the air itself seemed heavier, as if the land already knew something irreversible was about to happen. The plantation stretched for miles, cotton fields rolling like pale waves under a cruel sun, each bowl picked by hands that did not own the skin they lived in. At the center stood the big house, white columns polished to reflect power, control, and the illusion of order. Inside that house lived the owner, a man whose authority was never questioned, not by law, not by God as he understood him, and certainly not by those he owned. His daughter had grown up behind those columns, sheltered from the fields, fed rich meals, protected from discomfort, and yet burdened by a body her society whispered about behind closed doors. She was heavy, slow-moving, mocked quietly by visitors who smiled politely and judged mercilessly. To her father, she was not a daughter first but a problem, one that threatened reputation, lineage, and control. The slaves knew her by sight but never by name. They saw her sometimes on the balcony, her silhouette framed by lace curtains, staring down at a world she would never enter. They also knew the owner's temper, how it flared when things did not fit his sense of order. When rumors spread that he was angry about his daughter again, the quarters went silent. Anger in the big house always spilled into the fields. That morning, the owner called for one man in particular, a slave known for his strength, endurance, and silence. He had survived punishments that broke others, not because he was unbreakable, but because he had learned how to disappear inside himself. When the overseer fetched him, he already knew nothing good waited ahead. The order was given without ceremony, without explanation, as if it were no different from assigning labor or selling livestock. The owner spoke calmly, coldly, his eyes fixed not on the man but on the idea of control he was about to enforce. His daughter, standing in the shadows of the room, understood enough to feel fear claw at her chest, but not enough to stop what was coming. Her body had become a bargaining chip, a tool her father believed he had every right to use. He convinced himself it was practical, even merciful in his twisted logic. The slave was told this was his duty. Refusal was never an option. Consent did not exist in any form that mattered. What followed was not the crude act people later whispered about, but something far more disturbing in its consequences. The daughter did not scream as much as people imagined. Shock has a way of silencing the voice. The slave did not look at her face, because to do so would make him human in a situation designed to strip humanity from both of them. The power imbalance crushed them in different ways, one under ownership, the other under expectation. Neither walked away unchanged. Days turned into weeks, and something began to shift. The daughter's body, already the subject of cruel judgment, began to change in ways no one anticipated. Her health deteriorated, not in a dramatic collapse but in slow, visible suffering. She moved less, ate less, breathed harder. The house doctor was called, then called again, each time leaving with more confusion than answers. The owner grew impatient. His solution had not fixed the problem. Instead, it had created something new, something he could not control. The slaves noticed before anyone else. They always did. They saw her no longer appear at the balcony. They saw servants carrying meals untouched back to the kitchen. They heard whispered arguments late at night. The man who had been forced into the act was returned to the fields, but he was not the same. His strength remained, but his eyes carried a weight that made others step back. He worked without pause, without complaint, as if exhaustion were safer than memory. Then came the realization that shattered the illusion of control entirely. The daughter's condition worsened beyond explanation. Her body reacted not just physically but emotionally, collapsing under a trauma no one dared name. Doctors blamed her weight, her constitution, her nerves. The owner blamed everyone but himself. Yet the truth sat heavy in the room every time he looked at her. What he had done could not be undone, and what it had unleashed could not be ordered back into silence. The plantation, once a symbol of rigid hierarchy, began to feel unstable. The slaves sensed it in the owner's unpredictability, in punishments that seemed fueled by fear rather than authority. The big house no longer felt untouchable, and at the center of it all lay a woman whose body had become the evidence of a crime no law would ever acknowledge. 12/20, 1:42 p.m. Health Department. The days that followed blurred into each other, yet each carried its own quiet damage. The daughter lay confined to her room, curtains drawn not to shield her from sunlight but from the eyes of a world that no longer made sense to her. Her body ached in unfamiliar ways, not just from illness but from a deep internal resistance, as if her flesh itself rejected what had been forced upon it. She stopped asking questions because the answers were always wrapped in lies. Servants moved around her softly, avoiding eye contact, knowing they were witnessing something they were never meant to acknowledge. Her father visited rarely, and when he did, his presence filled the room with an unspoken accusation, as though her suffering were an inconvenience rather than a consequence. He told himself she would recover, that women were fragile by nature, that this was simply a phase. The thought that his decision had shattered her in a way that could not be repaired never crossed his mind in full, because to accept it would mean seeing himself not as master but as monster. The slave returned to the fields each morning before sunrise, his body moving by habit while his mind remained trapped in that room. He avoided the quarters at night, choosing instead to sit alone under the open sky, staring at nothing. Other slaves sensed the change and gave him space, not out of fear but respect. They knew the look of someone carrying a burden too heavy to share. He did not speak of what happened, because language itself felt like betrayal, and because no words could change the reality that he had been used as a weapon against another human being. He understood, with a clarity that cut deep, that both of them had been stripped of choice, each in different ways, by the same hand. The owner's frustration grew as rumors began to seep beyond the plantation. A doctor from the nearby town asked too many questions. A visiting relative noticed the absence of laughter in the house. Whispers began to circulate about the daughter's health, her strange decline, her sudden invisibility. In a society obsessed with appearances, invisibility was dangerous. The owner tightened his grip, issuing stricter orders, demanding absolute silence. He convinced himself that authority could still bury truth if applied with enough force. But truth has a way of leaking through cracks power cannot seal. The daughter's condition took a darker turn when she began to refuse food entirely. What started as loss of appetite became deliberate rejection. Each meal untouched was an act of quiet defiance, though she herself did not frame it that way. She simply felt no connection to a body that no longer felt like hers. The servants pleaded, the doctor warned, but she remained distant, her eyes fixed on something far away. Something no one else could see. Her father finally raised his voice, demanding obedience even now, but his words fell uselessly against a wall he could not break. For the first time in his life, his authority meant nothing. The plantation felt the shift immediately. The big house, once the unquestioned center of power, radiated tension instead of command. Overseers acted harsher, as if cruelty could restore balance. Punishments increased, but their effect diminished. Fear, once sharp and effective, dulled when wielded without confidence. The slaves noticed how the owner paced at night, how his voice cracked when issuing orders, how his eyes avoided certain truths. Power built on injustice is strong only as long as it remains unchallenged, and now the challenge lived under his own roof. One evening, a storm rolled in, heavy and sudden. Thunder shook the house as rain battered the windows. The daughter, restless and weak, rose from her bed and moved toward the mirror for the first time in weeks. What stared back at her was a body marked not just by weight or illness but by something deeper, something stolen. She touched her own skin and felt nothing familiar. In that moment, something inside her broke completely, not in a loud dramatic way, but like a thread snapping silently under too much strain. She sank to the floor as the storm raged outside, her body trembling in sync with the thunder. When the servants found her, panic erupted. Doctors were summoned again, prayers whispered, orders barked. The owner stood frozen, watching chaos unfold, realizing too late that his control had been an illusion all along. The outcome he had never considered now stared him in the face. Damage that could not be undone, consequences that refused to stay hidden. Outside, in the rain-soaked fields, the slave looked up at the sky as thunder echoed across the land. He did not know what was happening in the house, but he felt it all the same, a tightening in his chest, a sense of inevitability. The plantation, the hierarchy, the roles forced upon them all began to feel fragile, as if one strong wind could bring everything crashing down. And in that moment, without anyone fully realizing it yet, the outcome that would shock everyone was already in motion.
The rain has a way of softening the world outside, a steady rhythm tapping at the windows, a quiet reminder that you're safe inside, or at least you hope you are. Tonight, while the wind hums through the dark and the soft patter of rain folds into the silence of your room, I want you to listen, not to what you hear, but to what hides between the sounds. Because sometimes what waits beyond the rain isn't thunder, and what settles in the shadows isn't always as alone as we hope it is. There was a man named Daniel, someone ordinary, someone like you, who loved rainy nights because they made him feel calm. Whenever storms rolled in, he'd sit in his room, dim the lights, and let the rain wash the world away. But one night, while lightning flashed behind the curtains, he began to notice something strange. The rain sounded normal until it didn't. Instead of random drops, the rhythm seemed deliberate, like slow knocks. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause, repeat. He convinced himself it was nothing, just weather. But the next night, when rain came again, the same rhythm returned. 3 slow knocks, like a hand tapping on glass. That was when he remembered the story his grandmother used to tell. She warned him when he was a child, never open curtains during a storm when knocking doesn't come from a door. Because some things don't need to enter your house, they only need you to see them. He used to laugh at that. Now it didn't feel funny anymore. He sat in bed, phone in hand, rain whispering outside. The tapping grew clearer, gentle, patient, almost polite. Lightning flickered again, and in that brief flash, the silhouette of something stood outside the window. Not a person, too tall, too thin, and far too still. He didn't move, didn't breathe, he couldn't. The storm rolled on, thunder drifted away, but the tapping did not. He didn't look. He forced himself not to. Instead, he lay back down, pretending he couldn't hear, forcing his breathing to slow. Eventually, after an hour of waiting, the sound faded. He slept eventually, but only because exhaustion took him. By morning, when sunlight spilled through the curtains, curiosity finally won. He pulled them back, half certain he'd see nothing except rain residue and street reflections. There were fingerprints, long, wet fingerprints, pressed against the outside of the glass, but too high for any normal person to reach. He wiped them away, convincing himself someone must have played a trick. That night he went to bed early, locking windows and closing curtains tight. But the storm returned heavier than before. This time the rain didn't whisper. It crashed, it roared, it swallowed everything. Yet beneath it, the rhythm still found him. Tap, 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 always 3, always patient, like it knew he wasn't sleeping. His breathing trembled. His grandmother's words echoed in his head. Never open the curtains, never look, never acknowledge. He tried to ignore it, but something was different now. The tapping wasn't coming from the window anymore. It sounded closer, softer, more intimate, like fingers on the wall. He froze, slowly turning his head toward the bedroom door. The tapping was inside. He stayed perfectly still, every instinct screaming not to look. He felt presence without seeing it. The kind of presence you don't need eyes to recognize, because your body feels it for you. The air grew colder, not like air conditioning, but like something old and empty breathing beside him. The tapping moved again, closer to his bed, not loud, not aggressive, just testing, observing, curious. Then it stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. He didn't move all night. When daylight finally broke through, his bedroom was silent again. Normal, but the carpet beside his bed was soaked. 3 perfect wet handprints rested there, long fingers spread, as if something had leaned in and watched him sleep. He doesn't sleep on rainy nights anymore. He doesn't close his curtains either, because now, he says, when storms come, it doesn't knock. It stands in the yard, and he swears sometimes it smiles. So while you lie here listening to the rain, letting your eyes grow heavy, just remember, if you ever hear a rhythm that feels too intentional, don't acknowledge it, don't move, don't search, because the moment you notice something that shouldn't exist, it notices you back, and the rain won't drown its footsteps forever. The rain kept falling, but somewhere between one drop and the next, the world began to feel different. Rain should sound natural, random, messy. But there's something unsettling about realizing nature isn't behaving like nature anymore. That's what Emily discovered the year she moved into the small house at the edge of town. Cheap rent, quiet neighborhood and the promise of peaceful nights filled with nothing but rainfall against the roof. It sounded perfect, at least it did at first. She worked late shifts, so most nights she came home after midnight. That meant she lived in darkness more than daylight. She didn't mind. The dark felt comforting, safe. But on the first stormy night in that house, she noticed something odd. As she lay in bed, eyes closed, listening to steady rain, the sound abruptly changed. Not everywhere, just above her room. It no longer sounded random. Instead, it was as if rain wasn't hitting the roof at all. It sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing. She opened her eyes, holding her breath, listening. Another step, and another, directly over her bed, across the ceiling, back and forth, back and forth. Too heavy to be branches, too consistent to be animals, too human to be anything else. She stared upward, though she couldn't see through the roof, only hear the unmistakable weight shifting from one step to the next. Then it stopped. The silence felt thick. Her heart beat too loudly, and she worried that maybe whatever was up there could hear it too. She eventually convinced herself that old houses make strange sounds. Maybe wood expanded, maybe wind created illusions. She slept, and by morning everything looked ordinary. The world was normal again in daylight, but nighttime doesn't forget. The second storm came days later, louder, angrier. Sheets of rain hammered the town. Emily wrapped herself in a blanket, scrolling her phone, pretending she wasn't afraid. But like the night before, the sound changed above her, not right away. It was almost as if it waited for her to settle, waited until she was comfortable. Then came the first step, then the second. Then the slow, methodical walk right over her room. She swallowed hard, staring at the ceiling, and then something happened that removed all doubt. The footsteps stopped right above her head, and something knelt. The wood bent, weight pressed down, as though whatever stood above her had crouched low, lowering itself closer. To listen, that night, she didn't sleep at all. The next morning she called the landlord. He dismissed it immediately. No attic, just empty roofing. Nothing can get up there, he said. His voice was calm, too calm, like he'd heard this complaint before and already decided he wouldn't discuss it further. She tried to ignore the next storm, tried to sleep before it began, but rain has a way of waking you when it wants your attention. Lightning flashed white across her closed eyelids, and thunder rippled through the walls. Then the steps returned, slow, heavy, but this time there was something new, something that made her blood run cold, dragging, as though something above her wasn't just walking anymore, it was pulling itself. Like it didn't quite know how to move, but was learning. Step, drag, it moved from one end of the roof to directly above her bed, then stopped once more. The air inside her room cooled. Her chest tightened, and then a faint, gentle scratching began on the ceiling, directly above her face, soft at first, testing, curious, as though thin fingers traced the space between her and it. She whispered into the darkness, voice trembling, "Please, stop." The scratching stopped instantly and slowly, ever so slowly. Something tapped back, 3 soft taps in response. She threw her blanket over herself like it could protect her from something she couldn't even see. Eventually the tapping faded, the dragging moved away. The footsteps disappeared into the sound of rain again. But the silence that followed wasn't comforting. It was promising that this wasn't over. The next day she climbed onto the roof despite the landlord's warning. She expected nothing. She hoped for nothing. She prayed it was all in her head, but the roof wasn't dusty. It wasn't clean either. It was smeared, deep, wet streaks, long marks like something with weight had crawled. Not like paws, not like shoes, more like hands, large ones. They trailed right to the area above her bedroom, where the marks stopped. As if something had sunk down into the roof, trying to press through. She moved out a month later, but here's the thing. She still hears storms. Rain still falls wherever she goes, and sometimes, late at night, when thunder rolls and rain grows heavy, she hears dragging on the roof again. Not every storm, just some, as if whatever once crawled above that old house found her, and now it follows. So while you lie here, listening to the rain, letting your eyes drift and your breathing slow, pay attention to the sound above you. Make sure it's really rain. Make sure it's really random. And if you ever hear footsteps pacing overhead where no one should be, don't speak, don't respond, because the moment you acknowledge something that shouldn't exist, it finally knows where you are and it learns how to get closer. Rain has a strange relationship with memory. It makes people nostalgic, makes the mind wander back to places it shouldn't. But sometimes the rain doesn't remind you of the past. Sometimes it reminds the past of you. That's what happened to Michael, a quiet man who always kept to himself. He didn't believe in ghosts, didn't believe in curses, didn't believe in anything beyond what he could see. But belief doesn't change reality, and reality doesn't need your permission to become terrifying. His childhood wasn't kind. He grew up in a strict house, the sort of place where silence didn't mean peace, it meant fear. There was always tension, the kind you could feel in the walls. His parents fought constantly, voices raised, doors slammed, and when storms came, they got worse. He remembered being small, hiding in his room, listening to rain pound against the windows while something even louder raged inside the house. Thunder outside, shouting inside, crying echoing in hallways. And sometimes something else, knocking, not on the door, not on the walls, but inside his room, in the corner, behind the closet. 3 slow knocks, pause, 3 more, like something responding to the chaos by announcing itself. He never investigated. He didn't dare. When he turned 18, he left that house and didn't look back. He promised himself he'd never return to it in memories or in person. And for years, he didn't. He built a new life, new apartment, new city, a calm, quiet existence with no storms inside or out, until one night, it had been years since he'd last heard rain like that. Heavy, relentless, like the sky was trying to wash the world away. He sat on his couch, pretending he didn't hear it, pretending it was just weather, but somewhere in that constant downpour, he heard something else, knocking, 3 slow knocks, not at his door, not at his walls. But inside his apartment, inside, he froze, time didn't move, air didn't exist. His mind instantly went somewhere it hadn't gone in years, that old house, his childhood room, the corner behind the closet. He swallowed, trying to laugh it off. Old memories, imagination, the mind playing tricks, but then it came again, 3 exact knocks this time. Closer, he stood slowly, every muscle tight, and scanned the room. And nothing, just furniture, just darkness, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the room wasn't empty anymore. Something lingered, something familiar, something patient. He didn't sleep that night. The next storm came a week later. Stronger, louder, and so did the knocking. It didn't echo from one place anymore. It traveled across the living room wall, along the hallway, stopping near his bedroom door, always in sets of 3. Always calm, always controlled, as though whatever was making the sound wasn't trying to scare him. It was waiting. He called his mother the next day. He didn't want to, but the fear gnawed at him. He asked about the old house, about the storms, about the knocking. It was quiet on the other end of the phone for a long time before she finally spoke. "I never told you this," she whispered, "but I heard it too." His stomach tightened. She explained that it began before he was even born. During storms, only storms, always knocking from inside the walls, always 3 at a time. Priests came once. His father laughed, called it nonsense. But something in that house never laughed. Something stayed. And it never stopped. Even after he left home, the knocking continued, until the day he turned 18. Then it stopped, as though it wasn't interested in the house anymore, as though it had been waiting for him to grow up. Waiting for him to leave, waiting to follow. He hung up the phone in silence, his heart pounding louder than the rain outside. Everything inside him wanted to deny it, wanted to believe in rational explanations, in pipes, in structure settling, in anything human. But the next storm came, and this time the knocking didn't wander. It stood right outside his bedroom. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, closer, like someone pressing their ear to the door, listening. Then the handle of the door moved, just a tiny shift, just enough to prove it wasn't wind. He didn't open it, didn't breathe, didn't move, He lay there all night while rain whispered outside, and something, not part of this world, existed inches away from him. Morning came with sunlight, silence, normalcy, but something had changed. There were scratches on the bedroom door, 3 long ones, deep, intentional. Like something with patience and claws had traced its presence, signing its name without writing a word. He considered moving, packing, running, disappearing, but deep down he knew the truth. You can move away from places. You can escape people, but you can't run from something that didn't come from where you were. You can't outrun something that came from you now. Every time it rains, he doesn't listen for thunder. He listens for knocking. Sometimes it doesn't come. Sometimes storms pass peacefully, but the worst nights are when rain pours hard, wind howls, thunder cracks, and there is no knocking at all, because that just means it isn't outside the room anymore. It's already inside, so as you lie here breathing slow, listening to the rain darken your world, don't panic if you hear knocking. Panic when you don't, because silence doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes it means whatever was looking for you finally found you. Rain has a strange way of trapping sound. It keeps things close, holds them against the world like a whispered secret pressed to your ear. People think storms drown everything out, but they don't. Storms don't hide noise. They cage it. They wrap it in water and darkness and keep it echoing much longer than it should. That's something Claire learned the hard way the night she decided to drive home during the worst rainstorm of the year. She hated driving at night, especially in storms, but she didn't have a choice. Work ended late, the buses weren't running, and she had miles of empty back road to cross before home. The world looked like a blurred watercolor painting as rain poured down the windshield. Streetlights smeared into streaks, the wipers fighting and losing against the downpour. Trees bent in the wind. The sky grumbled. The world felt smaller, enclosed, like she was the only person left awake. That's when she saw it. A figure on the side of the road. At first, she thought it was just a tree, or maybe a trick of headlights distorted through rain. But as she drew closer, she saw it clearly. A lone person standing completely still in the rain. No umbrella, no coat, no movement, just standing there in the darkness as water soaked them from head to toe. Claire slowed down. Her first thought was someone needs help. Her second thought was this doesn't feel right. When her headlights fully illuminated the figure, everything in her body screamed to keep driving. Because the person wasn't reacting to the storm, wasn't shivering, wasn't hunched, wasn't shielding themselves. They were simply facing the road, head tilted slightly, like they had been waiting. For someone, for her, she didn't stop. She drove past, heart hammering, trying to convince herself it was nothing more than a strange encounter. People break down. People get stuck in weather. That's normal. That's human, but then something whispered, not inside the car, not outside the car, in the back seat. At first, she thought it was wind, but wind doesn't speak, and this wasn't vague noise. This was words. Wet, breathy, close words. Thank you for noticing. Her blood turned to ice. She didn't dare look in the mirror, didn't dare turn around. She just kept driving, knuckles white on the wheel, breathing shallow. Rain roared louder, thunder cracked close, but beneath it all she could hear soft breathing. Behind her, slow, steady, too calm. Her mind raced. She locked the doors as if that mattered now. Tears pricked her eyes, but she forced them back. Panicking wouldn't help. She focused on the road, on surviving the next few minutes. Just get home, just get home, just get lightning flashed. For a split second, the car interior illuminated like daylight. And she saw it. There was something sitting in the back seat, not quite a person anymore. Its skin looked wrong, stretched, like it had been in water far too long. Its eyes weren't furious, they weren't wild. They were worse than that. They were grateful, smiling, like a child finally noticed by a parent. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't. Her throat wouldn't work. The rain grew heavier, slamming the car with violent force, as if the storm itself was reacting. She tried to speed up, but the car fishtailed. The whispered voice leaned closer to her ear, though it never physically moved. No one ever sees me. She shook her head furiously, whispering through clenched teeth, "You're not real. You're not real. You're not." The thing leaned forward, just enough to distort its reflection in the windshield. You do. She swerved. Her heart almost stopped as the car skidded, tires screaming against wet pavement. Somehow she regained control and barreled forward, refusing to look again. She didn't talk, didn't breathe, didn't blink properly until she pulled into her driveway, shaking violently. The whispers went silent, the breathing stopped, the presence vanished. Rain continued to fall harmlessly now, like nothing ever happened. She turned slowly, terrified of what she'd see. The back seat was empty, completely dry, not even an imprint. She stumbled into her house, locked every door, closed every window, convinced that whatever happened was stress, exhaustion, fear, imagination. Until she noticed something on the inside of her car window the next morning. Words, faint, written in long streaks of dried moisture. 4 simple words etched by something that had no right to exist. See me again soon. She washed them off, sold the car, moved cities, tried to forget, but storms. Don't forget, and now every time it rains, no matter where she is, she hears it again, not a voice. Not at first, just breathing, soft, wet, behind her, waiting, because once you notice something that doesn't belong here, it doesn't go away, it doesn't disappear, it follows, and it waits for the next storm. So if you're listening to the rain right now, safe in your room, eyes tired, body relaxed, make sure you're alone. Make sure nothing sits behind you in the dark, silent and patient, smiling in gratitude simply because you finally noticed it exists. Rain doesn't care about comfort. It doesn't care about whether you're tired or peaceful or drifting toward sleep. Rain falls whether you're ready or not. It falls when you're awake. And it falls when you dream. For most people, rain is relaxing. But for some, rain isn't a soundtrack. It's a signal, a quiet announcement that something old has returned, something patient, something that never stopped watching. Ethan never feared storms. He actually loved them. Rain made him feel calm, like the world slowed down just enough for him to think clearly. Thunder was distant, gentle, almost protective. On stormy nights, he'd turn off the lights, lie down, and listen until he drifted into sleep. It was peaceful, until the night he started dreaming differently. It began simple, rain outside, darkness inside, him half asleep. Then his breathing slowed, his body relaxed. Sleep found him easily. But instead of slipping away into a normal dream, he found himself standing in his own bedroom. Same room, same bed, same sound of rain tapping the windows, except he was standing and he wasn't in control. He didn't remember getting up, didn't remember opening his eyes. He just was there, and he wasn't alone. Someone was standing in the corner, too dark to see clearly, a shape, a shadow shape, tall, motionless. Watching, his heart should have been racing, but in the dream his body wouldn't react. He couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even breathe properly. He just stood there while the shadow in the corner silently existed with him. Inside his room, then lightning flashed, and for just 1 second, he saw it clearly. It had no face, just stretched, smooth darkness where features should have been, and yet he knew it was looking right at him. The storm crackled, and Ethan woke up gasping, heart pounding, staring at the exact same corner from his dream. Empty. He shook it off. People dream. People imagine. Stress does things to the brain. He went back to sleep eventually. The next storm came a week later. So did the dream. He stood in his room again. The rain fell again, and the shadow was there again. But this time, it was closer, not in the corner anymore, halfway across the room. Facing him, waiting, lightning flashed, and that smooth, faceless darkness leaned forward slightly, curious, as if examining him, as if learning him. Ethan forced himself to wake up again, gasping harder this time, chest tight, skin cold with sweat. His room was empty again, or at least, it looked empty. He told himself it was all subconscious fear, night paralysis. Doesn't matter what name you give it. Fear always tries to sound rational in daylight. But storms don't live in daylight. The third storm came with heavier rain than any before it. By now, Ethan dreaded sleep, but exhaustion isn't a choice. Eventually, his body gave up fighting, his eyes closed. He found himself standing again, in the same position, in the same room, listening to the rain, but this time, the shadow wasn't across the room anymore. It was right in front of him, close enough that if it had a breath, he would have felt it. close enough that if it had eyes, they would have been staring straight into his soul. There was something new now, a faint shape, forming where a face should be, as if it had been studying, as if it had been practicing, as if it had been building one, not human, not right, pieces of features like a child drawing a person for the first time, wrong spacing, wrong proportions, wrong everything, and it leaned in. Slowly, curious, learning, almost. It didn't speak with a mouth, it spoke directly into his head, and only then did Ethan understand. It wasn't simply haunting him, it wasn't trying to scare him. It was trying to become him. Every storm, every dream, it wasn't visiting, it was copying. He broke free from the dream with a violent gasp, stumbling out of bed, his heart hammered, his body trembled. His mind shattered between fear and denial. He turned on every light in the house, stayed awake until morning, refused to close his eyes again. Rain eventually stopped, days passed, sunlight returned, and he convinced himself it was over until he woke up one night, not in his bed, not in a dream, standing in the middle of his room exactly like before, except this time he hadn't fallen asleep. He hadn't dreamed, he had moved without knowing, like something else. Had practiced enough, he slowly, painfully turned toward the corner of the room where the shadow always stood. It wasn't there. There was nothing in the corner, because now, it didn't need to stand there anymore. It had moved, it had learned. It was standing exactly where he used to stand, in his place, in his posture, in his silhouette. And it was smiling now, perfectly, exactly like him. Rain whispered softly outside, and somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, Ethan realized something horrifying. He wasn't watching a shadow anymore. He was watching himself, something wearing him, something rehearsing him, something practicing his existence like a role it wanted to steal. He doesn't talk much now. He doesn't sleep when it rains. He doesn't look into mirrors anymore either. Because sometimes when storms come, his reflection blinks before he does. So if you're lying here in the dark, listening to the rain, drifting lazily toward sleep, be careful with what your mind invites in. Be careful with what watches you while you dream, because some things don't want to frighten you. They want to replace you, and the rain always gives them enough time to learn how. Sleep well, if it lets you. The rain fell in gentle sheets outside, a soft drumming that could lull anyone to sleep or make them listen closer. On nights like this, everything seemed still yet alive. The world shrank to the small room you occupied, the darkness pressing softly against the curtains, the smell of wet earth drifting in through slightly open windows. And when the storm rumbled quietly in the distance, it carried with it stories that were never meant to be spoken aloud. Stories that listened to the rain as closely as you did. There was a woman named Leela who lived alone at the edge of town. She loved rain, the sound of it washing over the roof, trickling along the gutter, pattering against windows. It made her feel calm. But one night, the rain seemed to speak differently, not in words, not in melody, but in rhythm. Gentle taps on the window, 3, pause, 3, pause, repeat. She ignored it at first, telling herself it was just branches or maybe the old house settling. Yet something in that rhythm felt intentional, something that knew she was listening. By midnight, the tapping grew louder, more deliberate. Leela stayed in bed, sheets pulled close, heart thudding softly in time with the storm. The rhythm shifted, moving along the window pane, as though a presence was pacing outside, testing the glass. Lightning illuminated the room in flashes, revealing glimpses of a tall, thin shadow pressed just beyond the rain. Streaked glass. She tried to convince herself it wasn't real. Shadows can play tricks. The mind does that in storms, but the taps continued, patient, almost polite, as if whatever waited outside was aware she could see it. Morning brought relief. The rain slowed. Sunlight spilled across the floor. Leela inspected the window. The glass was clean, until she noticed them. 3 wet fingerprints pressed against the outside, too high for any normal person to leave. Her stomach sank. She wiped them away, thinking maybe a neighbor had played a prank. But that night, when the rain returned heavier than before, the tapping did not stop. It shifted. It moved to the wall, the floor around her bed, a presence unseen but undeniable, breathing softly in rhythm with the storm. Leela did not sleep. Every instinct told her to flee, but the storm had her trapped. The tapping drew closer. A shadow leaned near the bed, then it stopped. Silence followed, the kind of silence that leaves your ears ringing and your skin crawling. And in the morning, when the first light hit her room, she noticed deep wet impressions on the carpet beside her bed, long, thin handprints pressed into the fibers. She never slept on rainy nights again. The storm's rhythm, she said, was patient, waiting, watching, and she learned the hardest truth. Some things don't need to enter your house to know you. Some things only need to see you. So as you lie here listening to the rain, your eyes growing heavy, remember that not all sound is safe. Sometimes the quiet pauses between drops carry more than echoes. Sometimes the rain is a messenger, and sometimes it is the messenger of something that will never leave. The storm outside grew heavier, thrashing against the roof and rattling the windows, as though the sky itself was restless. Every drop seemed sharper, colder, louder than before, yet there was a rhythm beneath it. Not the random beat of rain. It was something deliberate, measured, patient. Marcus had always enjoyed storms. He said they reminded him the world could be calm and chaotic at the same time. But on this night, the storm seemed different, as though it had intentions. He lived alone in a small apartment on the 4th floor, the city below silent under sheets of rain. As he lay in bed, eyes closed, trying to drift into sleep, a sound stirred his awareness. Not thunder, not wind. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, scraping like fingernails tracing the walls. Marcus opened his eyes. The apartment was dark, still, nothing moved. He told himself it was imagination, stress, the storm echoing off the concrete buildings around him. But the sound came again, closer this time, deliberate. He sat up slowly, listening. It moved along the walls, from the living room to the bedroom, soft, calculated. Marcus's chest tightened. The sound wasn't random. It was learning the space. He realized that something patient and intelligent, was in his apartment. It didn't need a key. It didn't need a door. The rain hit it, softened the noises it made, and gave it cover. And now it was exploring, taking its time. Lightning flashed, revealing briefly a shadow in the corner of his room. Not human, too tall, too thin, moving unnaturally. Marcus froze, heart hammering. The shadow didn't move like a person. It moved like a thought, folding itself along the walls, learning the layout. Then the scraping stopped. Silence, but Marcus knew it hadn't left. He could feel it, patient, waiting. The rain seemed to pulse with it, and every tap against the window echoed like footsteps. Marcus didn't dare move. He lay down again, sheets pulled over his face, pretending sleep would protect him. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had no meaning in the storm. When he finally dared to lift the sheet, something had left marks on the floor beside the bed. Long, narrow scratches, precise, deliberate. And the cold, it lingered. By morning, sunlight revealed nothing else. The marks had vanished, perhaps a trick of perception. Perhaps the storm had washed them away. Marcus convinced himself of the first. He tried to ignore the tapping in his head that had begun with the rain, but nights like these returned. Every storm brought the sound back, and every storm brought the creeping awareness that whatever had been in his apartment before had learned the space, learned his habits, learned him. He moved after the third storm, found a new apartment far from the city center. But storms travel, rain travels, and Marcus realized one night, as drops fell gently against his new window, that the tapping had returned. Not from the outside this time. It was inside, patient, waiting, watching. He doesn't sleep on rainy nights anymore. He doesn't leave doors unlocked. He listens for the rhythm, the pauses between drops, because the storm is not random, and the presence that comes with it is deliberate. And as you listen to the rain now, lying quietly in your bed, remember, the pauses between the drops are not empty. Sometimes something waits there, learning, watching, and when the storm is over. It doesn't leave. The rain carried a different kind of weight tonight. It was relentless, hammering against the windows, flooding the gutters and sending the wind howling through the trees. But inside the house something else moved. Something silent, patient, and observant. Hannah had always found storms comforting. They reminded her of childhood evenings, tucked in her grandmother's home, listening to tales that blurred the line between imagination and reality. But tonight, the storm was different. It didn't comfort her, it watched her. She lay in bed, cocooned under blankets, listening to the rain, and then she heard it, a soft, deliberate tapping from the corner of her room, not the rhythmic patter of the storm. Not the creaking of old walls. This was precise, slow. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again. Each repetition measured, intentional, as if someone, or something, knew she was listening. Her heart began to pound in time with the storm. She told herself it was nothing, just imagination, maybe an animal in the walls. But the tapping didn't come from the walls. It came from the floor, from the corner, from the shadow beneath her closet. She didn't move, she couldn't. Her body refused to respond to the instinct to flee. She just listened. The rain continued, hiding the sound of something else moving, something breathing slowly, quietly. A flash of lightning illuminated the room briefly. Hannah saw it then. A shape, tall, thin, almost invisible in the darkness, crouched low, observing her. It wasn't human, not fully. The limbs were elongated, the movements unnatural, yet it moved with intent. It leaned slightly, like it was studying her reactions. Then it disappeared into shadow, leaving only the tapping, soft, methodical, patient. Hours passed, or maybe moments. Time had no meaning in storms like this. By dawn, the figure had vanished, but the evidence remained. 3 long, narrow scratches etched into the hardwood floor beside her bed, and faint, wet streaks along the wall where the shadow had leaned, as if marking its territory. Hannah moved out soon after. She told herself that leaving would end it, that distance and daylight would protect her, but the tapping followed, not always at once, but during storms it returned, on rooftops, in hallways, behind doors. Always testing, always patient, always waiting. Now she sleeps lightly on rainy nights, listening to the rhythm of the drops, aware that the pauses carry more meaning than the sound itself. The tapping is deliberate. It is learning, it knows, and if you listen closely, lying in the dark as the rain drums against your window, you might hear it too. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, and remember, what taps is not always outside. Sometimes it is inside, waiting, watching, learning, patient. The rain that night was heavier than anything Nathan had ever heard. It slammed against the roof, flooded the gutters, and sent branches scraping against the windows. He loved storms, usually. The sound of rain was calming, almost hypnotic, a natural lullaby. But tonight was different. The rain didn't soothe, it warned. Nathan had been driving home along a deserted country road, headlights cutting through the sheets of water, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle. The storm seemed alive, pressing down on him from all sides, making the night feel small, compressed, and isolating. And then he saw it, a figure on the side of the road. At first he thought it was a tree, distorted by the rain, or a traffic sign swaying in the wind. But as he drew closer, it became unmistakable. A lone person standing completely still, drenched, facing the road. He slowed, instinct urging him to stop, but something about the figure felt wrong. Not human, not alive. It didn't shiver, didn't move in the wind, didn't react to his headlights, just waited patiently. And then, just as Nathan prepared to drive past, he heard it. A whisper, soft, wet, and close, coming from the backseat of his car. He froze, heart hammering, breath caught in his throat. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the rain. The voice was unmistakable, intimate, speaking directly to him. "Thank you for noticing." The hair on his neck rose. He dared not look. He gripped the steering wheel, trying to convince himself it was his imagination, the stress of driving in a storm. But the voice came again, closer, more insistent. He turned slightly to glance at the rearview mirror, and in the flash of lightning he saw it. Pale, dripping eyes that seemed too aware, smiling. Nathan panicked. The car fishtailed on the wet road, his hands shaking violently. The voice leaned in, though its lips never moved. "No one ever sees me." He swerved, regaining control by a hair, racing toward home. The whispers faded with the rain, and by the time he reached his driveway, the storm had calmed, almost as if nothing had happened. He stumbled inside, shaking, heart still racing, convinced it was over. But the next morning, something caught his eye. Faint, wet letters on the inside of his windshield. 4 words, smeared in a way no human hand could have done. "See me again soon." He sold the car, moved to another city. Tried to forget, but rain follows you, storms follow you. And sometimes, if you are listening in the quiet dark, you can hear the breathing in the backseat again, soft and patient, waiting for the next downpour. Now Nathan never drives alone in storms. He never closes the blinds, and he always listens, because some things do not vanish. They only wait, and as you lie in bed, listening to rain outside your window, remember, sometimes what rides the storm with you is not the wind, nor the rain. It is the presence that waits for you in the quiet between drops. Patient, watching, learning, the rain tonight was different. Softer at first, almost gentle, then heavier, drumming against the roof and windows like a heartbeat. But this time it carried a whisper, a presence that didn't belong, pressing against the edges of the house, filling the quiet spaces. Olivia had always loved storms. She said they made her feel alive, made the world shrink to the small, safe spaces she could control. But tonight, control was an illusion. She lay in her bed, blankets pulled up to her chin, listening to the rain, and then she heard it, a faint scratching at the door, almost too soft to notice. At first, she thought it was the wind, the storm rattling the old wooden frame. But the sound came again, deliberate, testing. A soft, slow rhythm, like fingers tracing the surface, learning the space. Her heart began to race, pulse sinking with the storm. She stayed perfectly still, telling herself it was nothing, that old houses make strange noises. But the sound moved, climbing along the walls, descending onto the floor, approaching her bed. The air cooled suddenly, and she felt it, a presence close, patient, almost curious. Lightning flashed, revealing a dark shape in the corner. Not fully human, not fully shadow. Long limbs, unnatural posture, it crouched low, watching her. And then it moved, not aggressively, but intentionally, inching along the floor toward her. Olivia couldn't move. She couldn't breathe properly. She was frozen, every sense screaming. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time was meaningless under the storm's rhythm. By dawn, the figure had disappeared, leaving only faint scratches along the floor, streaks where it had leaned, and an icy draft that lingered. Olivia didn't sleep again that night, and she didn't sleep well on storms afterward. She tried to leave the house, but storms don't follow addresses. They follow awareness. Whenever the rain poured, whenever the wind howled through the eaves, she could hear it, soft, patient, moving, learning. The scratching never fully left. It whispered in the pauses of the storm, reminding her that some things don't need doors to enter your life. And as you listen to the rain now, lying in your bed, imagine something small, patient, waiting in the corner of your room. It doesn't move fast. It doesn't need to. It just learns. It watches. It waits for the pauses between raindrops, the quiet spaces in your house, the moments when your eyes are half closed. And when it strikes, it does so with precision. So, as you drift closer to sleep, remember, the storm may be calming, the rain may be soothing, but sometimes in the quiet you are not alone, and sometimes what watches you in the dark has been waiting for a very long time. The rain poured relentlessly, drumming against the roof like 1,000 tiny hands. Liam had always found storms comforting, the way they made the world feel smaller, quieter, contained, but tonight there was something different. The rain wasn't just sound, it was presence. It pressed against the walls, whispered along the windows, and carried something unseen with it. He lay in bed, listening to the rhythmic pounding, trying to let it lull him into sleep. That's when he noticed it, A faint sound beneath the storm, subtle, deliberate, a soft tapping, not from the window or the walls, but closer around the bed. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. It was measured, intentional, like someone or something was learning the space, studying him. Liam tried to tell himself it was imagination. Old houses creak, storms echo strangely. It wasn't real, but the tapping continued, moving along the floor, around the furniture, closer to him. His pulse quickened. Each beat of his heart matched the rhythm outside. The presence was patient, studying his reactions, waiting for the perfect moment. Lightning flashed, illuminating a dark shape in the corner. Too tall, too thin, it crouched low, observing, not human, not fully shadow. Something older, patient, and alive in a way that didn't obey natural rules. It leaned closer, testing boundaries, pressing against the edge of perception. Liam froze, unable to move, unable to breathe properly, paralyzed by instinct and fear. The tapping stopped, silence fell, heavier than the storm itself. Liam didn't move. He stayed in bed, eyes wide, listening to the rain. Hours, or perhaps moments, passed. By morning, the figure had disappeared, leaving behind only faint scratches in the floorboards, streaks where it had leaned, and a cold draft that lingered unnaturally. He didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after. Each storm brought it back, the tapping, the moving, the presence, and he realized it didn't need to strike immediately. It only needed to be patient, to watch, to learn. And now, every time rain hits the roof, Liam listens closely, counting the taps, noticing the pauses, because he knows that the storm does not pass unnoticed. Something watches in the quiet spaces, in the corners of the room, in the seconds between raindrops. Something that waits, something that never forgets. As you lie here listening to the rain outside your window, remember, some sounds are not random, some pauses are deliberate, and in those quiet moments when the rain softens, something may be learning you, studying you, waiting. Patiently, relentlessly, until the storm decides its time. The storm that night was relentless, thrashing against the windows, shaking the eaves, and rattling every branch outside. Sophia had always found comfort in the sound of rain, the rhythmic patter against the roof, the way it drowned out the world. But tonight the storm didn't soothe her. It watched. She lay in bed, listening to the rain, letting her eyes grow heavy. That's when she noticed it, a faint scratching along the walls, soft at first, almost imperceptible, then deliberate, precise, moving with intention. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm was measured, patient, almost intelligent. It didn't come from the window or the floorboards. It came from the corner of the room, the shadows behind the furniture, from the spaces she never dared look. Her pulse quickened. She wanted to tell herself it was imagination. Old houses creak. Storms echo strangely. Nothing in the room could move without being noticed. But the sound persisted, growing closer, circling her bed. She stayed perfectly still, listening as the storm raged outside, realizing that whatever made the sound didn't need doors or walls to reach her. It simply existed, patient, learning, watching. Lightning flashed, illuminating a dark silhouette in the far corner. Not human, not fully shadow. Limbs long and unnatural, posture strange and twisted, crouched low, observing. The presence leaned forward slightly, curious, almost studying her. It didn't move aggressively. It didn't make a sound. It just existed, patient, relentless, aware of every reaction she had. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed, then silence. The storm continued outside, but inside there was only stillness. Sophia didn't breathe. She didn't move. By morning, sunlight revealed nothing out of place. No marks, no shadows, yet she knew it had been there. She could still feel it in the air, a lingering presence. After that night, Sophia moved out. She tried to leave the house behind to escape the memory, but storms travel, rain travels, and when it rains, she sometimes hears the tapping again, soft and patient, moving along unseen surfaces, testing, learning. She never sleeps deeply on rainy nights anymore, always alert to the pauses in the storm, because she knows now, some things don't leave, they wait. And as you lie here, listening to the rain outside your window, let your mind drift, but remember, not every sound is random. Some movements are deliberate. Some pauses are full of intention, and in those moments when the rain softens and the wind quiets, something may be watching you, patient, studying you, waiting for the moment the storm allows it to move closer. The rain tonight was endless, a steady cascade against the roof and windows, filling the night with sound and shadow. Daniel had always enjoyed storms. They were predictable in their chaos, rhythmic in their violence. But tonight, the storm was different. It didn't just make noise. It carried awareness, patience, presence. He lay in bed, blankets pulled tight, eyes half closed, listening to the rain, and then he heard it. A soft, deliberate movement along the floorboards. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. Not random, not the house settling. It was precise, measured, intentional. The rhythm of the storm now intertwined with something else, something alive, something that knew he was listening. The lightning flashed, revealing a shadow in the corner of the room, not fully human, limbs long, posture unnatural, crouched low, observing. Daniel froze. The figure didn't advance, it didn't retreat. It simply existed, patient, aware, and for the first time he realized it had been learning him. Every storm, every pause in the rain, it had been studying him, tracing the space he occupied, measuring his reactions. The tapping moved closer, around the bed, to the walls, under the blankets. It wasn't aggressive. It was deliberate, studying, waiting. Daniel's heart raced, but his body wouldn't respond. He couldn't run, couldn't scream. The storm outside raged, and inside, the presence lingered, patient, relentless. Then the tapping stopped. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Daniel stayed motionless, listening, aware that the storm itself now seemed to hold its breath. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. He couldn't tell. When morning came, sunlight revealed nothing. No marks, no shadow, nothing. And yet he knew it had been there. He could feel it lingering in the air, patient, waiting. Storms came again. Every heavy rain carried the same rhythm, the same awareness. Daniel moved. He changed apartments, cities, even continents. But the tapping returned with the rain, patient, familiar. And he realized, with a chill that cut deeper than the coldest storm, that it didn't matter where he went. The presence traveled with him. It waited for the moments he was vulnerable, for the pauses in the storm, for the seconds when he let his guard down. Now he doesn't sleep on stormy nights. He doesn't close the curtains. He counts the taps, measures the pauses, listens to the rhythm, because he knows that the storm is no longer just a storm. It is a teacher, a guide, and the presence is a student, learning him, becoming familiar with him. And as you lie here, listening to the rain outside your window, letting your body relax and your eyes grow heavy,